What's good in the hood, YouTube? This is Crazy Samurai 71 here, bringing you guys another video. Today I'm bringing you guys a video on Kamen Rider GO episode 3. The episode is called Dr. Gamer 2018, and the episode overall was pretty good. It introduced us to M and Hero again, which for those of you that know, M was Kamen Rider X8, and Hero was Kamen Rider Brave. We only see X8 transform. We do not see Hero transform into Brave. As far as whether or not we'll actually get to see Brave fight alongside X8, we don't know yet. It could just be that his function was for this episode and that his role in the next episode might be on a smaller scale. It would be nice if we got to see him actually transform, but we don't know yet. And the little end scene that shows what will happen in the next episode didn't actually show any images of Brave being featured, so we really have no idea if that will even happen. So just keep that in mind. But anyway, what does end up happening is that the episode begins with us actually seeing that Sogo ends up waking up, and he ends up eating food. There's a point where we actually see Sogo asking Gaze for the butter knife, and what happens is that what Gaze does is he actually throws the butter knife at a piece of toast, and it like goes right through. So basically to act threatening and tough, which is what we're seeing really right now. What also ends up happening is that eventually Sogo's uncle ends up appearing. And what happens is that his uncle says, so I guess you guys are getting ready for school. And the reason why that's worth noting is because, you know, it's not clear what age they are until they actually tell us that they're supposed to be 18 years old, like Sogo. So that means that Tsukuyomi and Gaze are going to be going to school, though they're not going to be attending classes. What they're going to be doing is something very different. What does end up happening, though, is that Sogo's uncle ends up giving them each lunches, and they end up heading off. And what actually is going to happen is that Tsukuyomi and Gaze are going to be keeping an eye on Sogo while he's at school, you know, following him around from different places to oversee things to make sure that he doesn't do anything that will show that he's becoming more like Oma Gio. And the thing is that Sogo is kind of makes some remark or whatever, which makes Gaze say like, "Don't forget, I could take you out right now if I want to." And so he tries to act tough and threatening. He's still very much so against him. I mean, Tsukuyomi isn't necessarily all the way for Sogo right now, but she's more willing to accept him for what he is right now than Gaze is. So that's something to note. What we do end up seeing is that he heads to school and he's told just to act normal, do his regular thing. And what we do end up seeing is that Tsukuyomi and Gaze end up spying on him from large distances. They use these special binoculars to watch him just from a huge distance away, and they try to dress up to look like they're students so that they blend in well and they're not seen as some sort of stalkers that are just looking at them or whatever. They're seen as students. So they follow him around to different locations. Eventually, what does end up happening is that they follow him into a building. Now, at the same time, what we do end up seeing is that in the past, I believe it was, it should be 2016, there is a point where we see this, where we end up seeing Hora and also Wool. Wool actually freezes time, and what happens is that Wool explains to Hora about, you know, that Wool is after this past Geo person, and the thing is that Hora mentions the fact that that old geezer is still working, is still doing stuff, and the thing is that that's something actually worth noting, is because of the fact that in reality Oma Gio should be, if he is Sugo, 68 years old, which means that he's older. I mean, he's not a young person necessarily. So it is kind of interesting to even think about that when you think in reality, like how old he actually has to be. And the fact that he's as strong as he is and is still able to do everything is still pretty impressive, now that you think about it. But anyway, what does end up happening is that Hora ends up going to a location where this kid ended up being put on a hospital stretcher, and what happens is that the father is watching as the kid is being drawn in, but what happens is that suddenly time freezes, except the father can still move, and Hora's there. Hora introduces herself and basically says, "I have some good and terrible news for you," but let's start with the good news. And what happens is that she ends up using her ability as a time jacker to turn this person into another rider. In this case, she turns him into another X-Aid. So what actually ends up happening is that it then goes back to present time. And as I was saying before, he's being followed by Tsukuyomi and Gaze, and at one point he manages to sneak past them, heads into a supply closet in the gym of his school, and what happens is he ends up meeting his friend Takiwa, and what happens is that Takiwa ended up skipping school today. He ended up going into the supply closet and just playing a unbeatable game, a game that's so hard that no one can beat. And what happens is that at one point as he's playing it, suddenly the game ends up acting weird, and something occurs. Now, just prior to that, what does end up happening is the gym teacher he's gonna catch them, but Sugo ends up going out and basically explains it was just me in there, and he has to come after class to speak to the gym teacher. No big deal, but he had to cover for Takiwa. But when he returns back in there, suddenly the screen of the game reacts in a weird way, and suddenly that another rider, the another X-Aid, appears, and what happens is that it attacks. Suddenly, Takiwa faints. Sugo transforms into Kamen Rider Gio, but then what happens is that the another X-Aid disappears quickly, and Takiwa is in a bad state. He's not in a healthy shape, but it's not clear as to how to help him. So they do bring him to a hospital, but they really don't know how to cure his illness. It's still a mystery, and a lot of people have the same illness, so it's creating a big problem. So what does end up happening is that they end up trying to continue on figuring out what they can do to help their friend. Eventually, at one point, I'm trying to remember how this worked. They end up seeing Sugo ends up seeing another X-Aid again. This time, it attacks another person, and that person has to be sent to the hospital. What does end up... No, that's right. Okay, I'm trying to remember how this went. So what actually happens is that they're hearing about... what happens is that he ends up going into a building and notices the game, and he thinks to himself, maybe the game has something to do with why he has this virus. So then what happens is that he starts to try and play it. Sugo is pretty awful at video games, which is something we see very quickly. He really can't do well at all. And the thing is that Gaze gives him advice, which he doesn't mean to give him, but he does anyway, about getting an actual gamer to play it. Because clearly he's not one, so get someone that actually knows how to play video games really well. And what happens is that they end up wondering who it could be that they should go and speak to. They hear of this gamer. What happens is that Tsukuyomi ends up finding online about this gamer known as M, who is this mysterious gamer, has very little personal info, and is known as the Genius Gamer. So what happens is that Sugo ends up going to different buildings. He goes to arcades, all sorts of different places, trying to look for him. Can't find him at all. He has no idea where M is. And then what happens is that they're wondering where he could be. Eventually, as I was saying before, there's another rider attack again, from that another X-aid, and it attacks another person who gets ill. Suddenly, Woes appears. When Woes appears, what happens is that Woes gives him the suggestion of going to a specific hospital, because it might give him a better idea of who where who he's looking for and where he is. And so what happens is that as we've seen already, Woes tends to drop hints of things to do in the future and events that will happen. So really, Woes really is an oracle in a way, in the sense is that he's someone that has this kind of bigger knowledge about the future. And so what happens is that they end up heading to this hospital, they end up checking in this patient, and then what happens is that two nurses end up talking about the gamer Dr. Emu, because the thing is that he's a pediatrician, even though he's supposed to be a surgeon, and the idea is that they're talking about him, about how he hasn't been at work for a while, he's probably playing a game or something like that, and that's when they think, maybe they're talking about M. So what happens is that Tsukuyomi, Gaze, and Sugo end up trying to talk to them, and they're trying to figure out where M is, but they don't really bring up specifically where he is. Suddenly what happens is we end up seeing Hiro Kagami appear, and what happens is that they end up trying to ask about M and the current illness situations and everything like that have been happening, and eventually it makes Hiro interested. Hiro is seen as someone that's very attractive, someone that's praised a lot in this hospital, so a lot of people give a lot of respect to him, which is something that's worth noting. What does end up happening is that he does assist them. They do enter into the office of M, and what happens is that they also discuss the fact that he knows about this game that was unbeatable because M told him about it, and the thing is that the last he heard from M was that he was trying to beat it to figure out how to cure these patients, and he was having so many problems solving this problem, and they know it has something to do with this another rider, but they don't know all the details. Well, at least Sugo does, and Tsukuyomi and Gaze, but Hiro really doesn't understand the entire situation. He just wants to cure his patients. So what does end up happening is that they go into his office. He leaves behind a letter, and what happens is that Sugo tries to read it, and the words aren't in Japanese, they're not in English, they're actually German, and the thing is that the words don't make any sense to them, but Gaze does speak a little bit of German, and he actually recognizes that the words are referring to, left, left, right, right, up, down, down, like the different game inputs. And so what happens is he ends up pulling out that game that he was playing before, Sugo, and he ends up putting in the inputs. And after he puts in the inputs, and also puts in all the buttons at once, what happens is that suddenly they're sent to the location where the another X-aid is and where M is. Initially we don't know that, but what happens is that they arrive there, they end up finding this another X-aid, and what happens is that Gaze and Sugo end up transforming. They initially are doing okay, although this another X-aid does manage to use the block attacks, which are pretty well known from Kamen Rider X-aid, where they break off blocks, and you even see the hit whenever they get hit, which is something that was also very much so seen a lot in Kamen Rider X-aid. And what happens is that eventually we end up seeing the two of them use ride armor. This time we actually see the first use of the drive ride armor, which is cool to see that. And also we end up seeing Sugo use the the build armor again. So that's something to note as well. He does use the build armor, and they do use the drive armor, so we actually get to see the finishing attacks from both of those, which is very, very cool. And eventually, after they defeat the another X-aid, it turns back into a human, and then they're met by M. M introduces himself, but he says that they will not go any further from here, and he transforms into Kamen Rider X-aid. At that point, he ends up starting his attack on Sogo and Gaze. So we end up seeing that happen. And he was also surprised by the fact that they even managed to get there, but clearly they must have found his letter. That's something that he was able to realize right away. That they must have found the letter. That's how they must have gotten into the game. So what does end up happening, though, is that we end up seeing the preview for the next episode. The preview for the next episode will, as you would expect, going to bring them to the year 2016 when Kamen Rider X8 was around. What will happen is that there will be fighting with another X8 again. They also show off M again fighting, and what also ends up happening in the teaser that we see is Sogo will use the X8 armor. So yes, he will be getting X8 armor next episode. And then episode 5, people are suspecting will have something to do with Forze, although people are also talking about Fize having some sort of connection to the next set of episodes. I'm not sure what that's all about, like whether or not there's something to do with like a special movie, or if that's actually what's going to happen in like episode 5 or 6. But it is interesting to see that. So we'll have to wait and see. Otherwise, that's about it for me, guys. I personally did enjoy this episode a lot. I thought it was really good. It is good to see the two of them return from their season. Yeah, it should be very interesting. I'm just looking forward to seeing what will come in the future with future riders in the show and how they'll function. Because once we get through, up to episode 6, I really don't know as of now what will, about anything for sure regarding which riders we'll be seeing next. There are rumors going around that Ghost might be showing up, even though we already have the Ghost armor that Gaze uses. But the thing is that even though he has that armor, it doesn't mean that they can't feature it in some way. And the other thing is that technically, even though he has that armor, technically Sogo can also use that armor. They're supposed to be able to be interchangeable. In other words, meaning that Gaze can use any of the armor that Geo can use, and Geo can use any of the armor that Gaze can use. And the thing is that how they look actually does change. It's not like a huge change, but it's enough to the point that you can see that there's some differences in appearance. But we haven't seen that yet in the actual show. So I'm definitely looking forward to seeing when that will eventually happen, because it should happen soon. I just don't know when. Please remember to like, comment, subscribe. I'd love to know your guys' opinions about this episode, and I hope to see you guys in the next video. So until then, guys, I'm Crazy Samurai 71, and goodbye, guys.